The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good morning, everyone. This is Greg Gust with the National Weather Service in Grand Forks. I have Jim Kaiser somewhere nearby to assist, and we will be giving our fourth of four planned Spring Outlook webinars discussing the prospects for the 2020 spring flood. I have up in that title, Is Spring Any Nearer? A little bit of a reference to temperatures coming up here in the near future. So I'm going to again continue with this talk and have you all on mute for a while, and then we'll open up the lines after I'm done with this presentation. Let's see, I have to get this moving. There we go. So I haven't changed much in the wording of these. Really, the flood risk hasn't changed much either in any of these outlooks. Still no big storms since mid-January, but stay tuned. There's one on the way. We have not seen significant increases in snow or snow water contents way since back in January 18th, 19th time period. So we're still running that 1/2 to 3/4 of an inch below normal for the January through March period at least. And mild conditions have persisted. We did get some early thawing processes going on, but those have frozen up again. Last night we were seeing some thawing again, and we'll speak to that. The bad news is, of course, that the risk for significant flooding is still very high across the basin. And those soils are still very, very wet, and we're still expected to see significant amounts of runoff from the existing snowpack and the prospects for this late thaw that is coming up. We do have climate outlooks that are still not showing any clear signals for wet, dry, or normal conditions in the long run, but in the short run, they're showing for a return to colder and wetter conditions here through the near term. So again, this spring, our risk levels are still running high, possibly in that top 10, maybe even top 5 flood territory for some locations around this basin. And this is the update. The really only significant change to colors on this map is that we've added the minor flood risk category up there in Roseau, and otherwise most of the risk categories have stayed the same, as well as those main risk numbers between the 25th and 75th percentile that we like to point out. So again, not significant changes going on there overall. I'll speak a little bit to things that are going on in the South Basin and points north. So again, since September, very wet conditions, wettest period on record through September and November. So that was the highest overall, as well as the water year, or the year from January through December for 2019. I did want to point out though, looking at snowfall, one thing, if I add October into the mix, so the left-hand picture shows from October through March, and you'll notice that big bullseye over Nelson County moving toward Devil's Lake, and that relates to that record snowfall event that occurred in October of 2019. If we ignore October, because that snow melted, if we ignore October and just look from November through March, we'll see that, well, there's a bit of a snow drought that's occurring in the far northeast part of North Dakota, far northwest Minnesota, and also a little bit of a snow drought down in the far southern part of the basin, with the area right through the central corridor near normal and above normal at the 100 to 125th, even 150th percentile, right through the central part of the basin. So again, how do you want to look at that? Well, a lot of that moisture from October is still available as runoff potential. Clearly the snow melt is occurring, and some of that snow in the South Basin and the northeast part of the basins has been reduced. So we are seeing that reduction in the snow cover overall, but there's still moisture coming out of that and available in the ditches, in the streams, and moving. I say in the ditches and in the streams, but looking at the survey here a couple of days ago and driving through those areas, realizing that those ditches are still largely frozen over, those streams and rivers are all still frozen over. There's not open water flow occurring at this time. The soil moisture rankings have dropped just slightly across the northern tier states, but we're still looking at our 99th percentile for the vast majority of the Red River Basin, down to the 95th percentile in far northeast North Dakota. But that's still very wet soil overall for this time of the year. The accumulated precipitation, this is just, again, the same type of graphic I've been showing going back to September 1st, and you can see that 4 to 8 inches above normal precipitation, largely through that September-October time frame, but a little leaning into November, December as well. By the numbers, the bottom chart for Grand Forks shows that we're still running in first place for moisture overall since September 1st until now. Fargo has been steadily dropping down. It started out in about second place. Last outlook, we were down to 5th place in Fargo. Now we're down to 9th place. So again, just because we're getting very little precipitation, now going 7-8 weeks, we are steadily dropping down through those years. Still very wet soil, but not as much precipitation in the southern part of the basin overall, and so that does have some impact on flood outlooks. General, the flow in these rivers, and currently those that are at high levels but frozen over now, are again at the 90th or greater, and in a lot of cases the 99th percentile for flow. So those first two ingredients, again, the fall moisture and the base stream flow very high, and highest leading into this winter and into the spring snowmelt. The frost depths, the only change I've made is our winter snowpack is now near to above normal. It was running above normal because we got a whole winter's worth of snow by the time we reached mid-January, but now we're some parts of the basin have not exceeded that average amount, so the far south and the far northern parts of the basin are just running near normal. As well, the snow water equivalent in that is still high, and again, we've had that full winter's normal value sitting here since mid-January. And there's a map just showing in the background some of these snow depth, but there's the frost depths that are still showing around the area. Highly variable. There's a lot of zero frost depths that are showing up in the southern basin from Fargo south and southeast, as well as areas of frost of 6 to 24 inches showing up in there. So highly variable frost depths still, mainly through the central part of the basin, 10 to 30 inches deep, even a 49-inch deep showing up there near Adams. Again, highly variable snow depth depending on when that snow hit and how deep it has been. The snow depth analysis, looking in more detail as of March 11th, you can see that there's 0 to 8 inches across that far southern part of the basin. Some fields showing 60 to 70% open, others at 30% open, but there's still moisture that is in the ditches, still moving, well, frozen, but trying to move off the landscape. Still not much in the way of runoff occurring anywhere at this point. But most of that, and I say most of that, has been compressing since our January 23rd outlook. There's only been slight additions into there. So at Fargo and Grand Forks, you see the 7 and 11-inch depths that are occurring, and it's basically still holding nearly all of the water that it had early on in that snowpack. A little bit has been moving out of the system. In some cases, a half an inch or more of the water has moved out, but we're still holding it in the skin layer of the soil, as I tried to describe. Looking at Fargo and Grand Forks, 2.5 to 2.8, pushing 3 inches of water in the snowpack between the two locations. So mostly in that central part of the basin, 2.5 to 3.5 inches overall. Maybe the 4 to 4.5 inches is a little further into the Minnesota area there. But still snow water available for runoff and more possible. This is just a reflection on where we were last year at this time. Noticing that February of 2019 and early March, that February was the snowiest February on record. Early March continued with very heavy snow. So we had a lot of base snowpack at this time of the year last year. We did not have the wet soils underneath it, just to keep that in mind. So now, what is our snow water that's in the river model? If you look at the larger image there, that's what the River Forecast Center was using. If you look at those coloring, the light green to the very light blue shades are the near normal tercile, the 40th, 50th, 60th to 70th percentiles in there. As you get into the darker blues, that's still in the 70th and 80th percentile, where you don't have much except right up by the Red Lakes. That's in the 90th to 100th percentiles. And that's a change. The lower image, the smaller image, shows how we were sitting here at the 24th of February. So again, the overall snow water equivalent and how it ranks for this time of the year is showing in that graphic. Much of that water that has been melting off is sitting in ditch networks right now. Some of it, I say, in the skin layer of the soil, meaning it's not yet soaked deeply into the soil. It's sitting there, still available for runoff as we melt, as we warm up here in the coming weeks. So what's next? The spring thaw cycle, the heavy spring rains, that's something that looms on us now. Since we are not expecting our temperature regime to get our spring flood going here in the next week or two, we are now pushing our risk later and later into the season, so we start becoming more susceptible to that risk of a heavy spring rain as we get into April. For the week here today through Thursday, we are looking at a winter storm coming into the area and giving us the potential for a quarter to a half an inch of precipitation across the area. Most of that, again, is coming in from late Saturday into Sunday, early Monday morning. And again, the track of that storm is somewhat variable. We are expecting heaviest snow into the central and northern part of the Red River Basin. But again, stay tuned. That could move around a bit here over the next few days. I did not include the picture for precipitation that occurred this morning. So if you look at the southern part of the basin, areas near Fargo and south, there were areas that were getting 1/10 of an inch, 15 hundredths to 23 hundredths of an inch of light rain that moved through there this morning. So again, not expecting that with the weekend storm, so the southern basin could be less overall from that storm. But if you add that in, pretty much most of the basin between this morning through next Thursday, quarter of an inch to half an inch of moisture. The week 2, so that's the 8 to 14 day forecast issued yesterday, or valid, excuse me, now, but issued yesterday, late yesterday, showing very cold temperatures, or at least colder than normal, across much of the northern plains states, and near normal for precipitation. So again, with that turn to colder conditions, right now a normal high temperature in the Fargo-Moorhead area would be just at 32, 33 degrees. In the Grand Forks area, just at 31, 32 degrees. So overall, we would just be normal to see temperatures reaching a high at the freezing point and lows still below freezing. So with that below normal temperature forecast in there for the next week to 2 weeks, we are going to struggle to get above freezing over that time period, and should have our nighttime temperatures mainly below freezing. There will be a little bit of a warm up here as we get into next Tuesday, Wednesday, and that could see temperatures above freezing in the basin. And again, the risk for getting a nighttime temperature above freezing would mainly be just across the far southern basin sometime in the middle part of next week. But overall, we're going to be seeing a very slow melt cycle right now this week and next. And no clear climate signals again as we head into the springtime. Most of the longer range models are tending to keep us a bit on the cool side now and wetter side, but still nothing very strong showing up in any of the signals. So with that, the prospects for being a delayed thaw and a late runoff cycle looms large. So if we'd have talked about this last week, I'd have been optimistic. I would have said, gee, things are warming up, things are starting to move, and maybe we'll see big water starting to flow through the latter part of March. This week's ideas say, no, it's everything's cooled down a bit, and now we're looking at onset of big water would have to be late March more likely into early April. So keep paying attention to that, but likely not seeing anything here significant for thaw and runoff in the next week or two. There's the flood risk by category. Again, as we've talked about, just bumped Roseau up into the minor flood risk category there at the 50% range. Overall, the range is not changing much across the basin. These are old maps here, so I'm going to bump out of these and get to this if we can. Let's see if my mouse is going to behave. Let's get down here. I want to again point out this is our probabilistic forecast outlook system here that we've developed, our probabilistic flood outlook summary. There we go, PFOS. And I've got the link on the handouts I sent out. You can see this. It's weather.gov/FGF PFOS that you can go to and look at these. And there's all the river forecast points on there. And I'm just going to point up a few of them here. So on the far south basin, looking at Wahpeton and Breckenridge, you can see that here's the 2019 flood crest level, 14.66. Right now, our 50th percentile is showing that coming in somewhat below the 2019. So we've been steadily reducing the overall flood threat down in that Wahpeton Breckenridge as, again, the snow content not being that high and also some of the thawing that's been going on, reducing the overall flow into there. Let's back out of that and go up a notch. So from there into Hickson, some reductions, but if we look at Abercrombie here coming in on the Richland side, you'll see that again, looking at 50%, or excuse me, what actually occurred in 2019 at 21.28 feet. We're coming in just slightly below that here at 20.8 at the 50th percentile showing for this year. That's again just slightly reduced overall from the last few outlooks. However, we need to keep in mind that in 2019 the timing between what was coming out of the Wild Rice Basin and what was coming out of Minnesota were somewhat offset by a couple of days. If we look at them being more closely timed to normal, we would still see that in Fargo, it's still coming in very close to the 2019 level, even with those reductions that are coming in from the locations out by Wahpeton Breckenridge. So again, timing could bring that in and bring it in very close to the 2019 levels. You will see that there is a very low risk of getting much higher than that, up at the 2011 levels, just under 10% risk. As we come in here from Valley City, again, 2019 levels came in at 15.16 feet. Right now, the 50% line is showing almost 2.5 feet higher and above the major flood category. That has been reduced slightly from the last outlook, and part of the reason for the reduction is we have been seeing significant snowmelt out toward the Harvey area up in the upper part of the Cheyenne River Basin. So that is removing some potential flow in the overall Cheyenne system, so that takes some of the pressure off of Valley City and the rest of the Cheyenne River Valley. But we are going to still see significant flow piling up and backwater flow as we get into Kindred. Again, that's coming in at the 50th percentile, just slightly below the 2019 level. And then as we get, I have to zoom in here again to look up at Harwood. We have, oh, that's the West Fargo version, I'm sorry. Back out here, go a little further and get Harwood up here. And you'll see that we're still looking, that 50th percentile is coming in somewhere slightly above what happened in 2019. And again, just expecting the timing of those to come in a little closer and create that backwater effect. As we get up the Red River, we'll notice that Hendrum coming in very close to the 2019 level as well, off the Wild Rice River and the backwaters that occur here, the Minnesota Wild Rice River and the backwaters that occur as that meets up with the Red Lake, or the Red River, excuse me. And at Halstead as well, we see that at 2019, 39 feet, just a bit over, and we're currently at the 50% level, just under 39 feet there. As we get further up, we are going to be pulling more water in again from the Red Lake River system. So into Crookston, the 2019 level, 24.82. Recall that that was quite ice affected as it came through there, so that added a little bit more onto the stage there. Currently the 50th percentile showing right at the major flood stage level there at 23 and a bit. Into Grand Forks, again with the timing and possibilities in there, we see in 2019 it came in just under 47 feet, but we are saying that there's the 50 percentile risk is just above 48 feet in Grand Forks. So a little bit more coming in than in 2019. And that holds again for a lot of the northern part of the basin itself. As we get up to Oslo, again, that flood cluster showing in very close to the 2019 levels with a lot of spread expected on the river itself. As we get up to Drayton, there we're now looking at the 50th percentile to come in above the 2019 level. There's a little bit more runoff in the northern part of the basin. Last year it was quite dry, very little runoff during that spring flood. We did have, for instance, in Hallock, if we call 2019 that high level, that was actually the fall flood, not the spring flood level. So we are looking to come in just below the fall flood level, but above the spring flood. So that's still going to be a substantial amount of water, especially between Hallock now and the Red River, where there will be backwater effects. And then coming into Pembina, we can see that it peaked there at 49.38 feet in 2019. We are expecting higher flows or higher stage levels coming in this year at above 52 feet. Okay, so let me see if I can figure out how to unmute and start answering questions. Okay, looking for questions. I do not see questions. I see no questions being asked at this point. Where's my unmute button? Okay, so here I've got some questions. First off, regarding that Pembina height being 3.5 feet higher than last year, that is correct. And again, it's because we're getting a lot more flow coming in from the central and northern part of the basin into the overall Red River flow. The predictions for Devil's Lake, I'm sorry, I do not have the Devil's Lake graphic up there. I will see if I can get to that. We don't have it on this PFAS map, so I'm going to go over to our regular AHPS probabilities and the chance for exceeding during the entire period. So these should all be updated in there. Yes, it is. So if we were to look at that, the 50th percentile comes in, and I'm not reading it off my chart, but it comes in here between 51 and 51.25 feet. So right now we are just at 1449 showing up on that on the gauge at Creel Bay. So we are expecting to see that 2 foot, possibly if you look at that between the 25 and 75th percentiles, still in that roughly 2 to 3 foot range. I think we called it 1.6 to 2.6 foot range. I'm seeing some other questions coming in now. So that's the prediction for Devil's Lake, and again, most of that inflow is going to start late as we get into May and early June is when that peaks. One question we have is, do we need any more SWE measurements at this time? So that SWE is snow water equivalent. So if there are any out there, we certainly can use them, especially through the central and northern part of the basin. I know I was talking to, on the Minnesota side, some of the watershed managers yesterday, and there's a few more measurements that are going to be coming in through there. I say there's a storm coming, yes. Are we talking blizzard conditions or just a snow event? I'm turning to Jim.
So the weekend storm system does not look like it has wind associated with it, maybe some wind on the backside. And again, it's going to be probably the northern half of the basin seeing any sort of significant precipitation.
Okay, so most of that, again, central northern part of the basin being significant. It'll be temperature regime. Could there be any mixed rain, snow in the south?
There's a possible mix in the south.
Okay, and not blizzard conditions, meaning not enough wind to bring you to that. There's always a little bit of wind with us, but nothing looking for a blizzard condition. Okay, still looking at questions on there. I think I'm caught up. How much snow is forecast and where? So again, the snow that's forecast for this upcoming winter storm this weekend is generally 1/4 to 1/2 inch of water equivalent, generally in the central to southern parts of the basin. So we're talking across central to east central and northeast North Dakota, northwest Minnesota. The target line of heaviest precipitation is just about right through the Grand Forks area, moving from west to east. And as far as snowfall, with that 1/4 to 1/2 inch of liquid, we could be seeing 3, 4, 5, 6 inches of snow, 7 inches of snow. With the delayed thaw, the next question is, with the delayed thaw snowmelt, will an additional spring outlook webinar occur on the 26th of March? So there we go. You've noticed that we only had these 4 scheduled. Talking with the River Forecast Center, they do not like running these probabilities as we get into later March, because what happens is all of the nice gentle thaws have disappeared, and so they're only looking at those April events. And so a year like 2009, 1979, 1997 start to weigh really heavily. And if you look on this Devil's Lake chart, for instance, you look at those 3 dots that are sitting up there extremely high. Those are extreme years that are going to be big April years. Okay, I can show you a similar one for Grand Forks and Fargo, and you're going to see 3 extreme years. For Grand Forks, those extreme years would be a 2009, a 1975, and a 1965, where you had, again, just wet conditions and a lot of QPF coming in during the late March and April time period. So again, the risk is there, but running it in late March doesn't necessarily give us any more help on honing in on this. So what about snow March 19th and 20th? So that's looking a little further down the line, and it's certainly possible. There are plenty of models out there. If we look at what we call the GEFS, the whole global ensemble forecast system, there is the possibility that late in the period, and we're talking after the 7-day period, but into the 10 to 14-day period, that we could see another 1/2 inch or more of moisture across the area. I will tell you that at this time of the year, to get 1/4 to 1/2 inch of moisture every week from now into April is right in the normal range. So if we can keep it to that, then we'll be holding closest to that 50th percentile in the probabilities. If we go much higher than that, then we start looking into these low probability, high risk areas. Is Fargo still asking for volunteers to fill stand bags? I think that's a question that you need to ask Fargo. I suspect from what I was hearing on the radios yesterday that they are still looking for people. Okay, so I think we've covered where the snowfall is. We've talked about later into March events. Yeah, I don't think the spring 2019 flood has been paid out by FEMA yet. There's a question about that. So there you go, back-to-back years. And I see a hand. What is my hand? Can I unmute that hand? Boy.
Nope.
There, I see questions. Okay. Brett Lambrecht, I've got you unmuted. Do you have a question, Brett? I do not hear a question. Jeff Pulowski, can you hear me and state your question?
Yes. Why? I'm just curious as to why the forecast for Rosa was raised.
Again, part of it is just because we're getting into a later season. Now, you did have some small amounts of precipitation in there, so that's partly a factor, but just because we're getting into the later season and the fact that we still have snow sitting on the ground. Also, we have been getting a higher amount of snow core measurements that lean into the southern part of the Roseau River Basin, so that also is a slight factor in there.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Jeff. Okay, let's see who else. I'm going to go back to Brett Lambrecht. Can you hear me? I see the question on there. Do these forecasts include some of the future precipitation? The weekend system is included. So when you look at that weekend system that is coming up, that is included. When you look at stuff late next week and beyond, that simply goes back to the reference I made. If it's near normal during those weekly periods, it fits in that 50th percentile nicely. If it's above normal in each of the next weeks, then you start leaning into the 40th and 30th lines. Okay? Anything else on that, Brett? Okay. And now, let's see, going down here. Travis, I saw a question, but did we cover it already? Okay. Okay. Going once, going twice. Any more questions? All right, folks, thank you much.